Welcome to Adams, Letters, and Language, a revolutionary elocutionary podcast. I'm Sarah Walsh, a school librarian by vocation and historical interpreter kind of by accident. I've been studying and portraying Abigail Adams for about 9 years. Along with building my impression by hand-sewing 18th century garments, I wanted to go deeper and get as close as I could to really becoming Abigail by learning how to speak in an 18th century New England dialect. Enter Christopher.
Hello and welcome. I'm Christopher Davis. I've been a dialect designer for over 12 years now, and I've come to specialize in speech and accent coaching for historical performers, whether they be actors, voiceover artists, or historical interpreters. My goal in this approach is to strive toward more authentic ways of representing the spoken word of the past. Now, I refer to myself as a dialect designer rather than by the more familiar term dialect coach, because in addition to coaching performers, so much of my work entails researching what can be found out about the spoken word prior to the invention of audio recordings, and then shaping that information into an accent or speech pattern that a performer can use. This can be tricky since we don't have audio samples to listen to, as I would if I were, say, coaching a modern-day accent. This results in a lot of design choices to fill in the gaps of what we know and what we don't know. Now, this may seem like I'm just making things up, but trust me, there's a lot of research that goes into making my designs as authentic as possible. Just in brief, I depend highly on primary sources, of course, people who were writing about English during the time period. Either they were writing books to tell people about what was going on with the language. Those are very useful. But there are also indirect sources as well through people's letters and diaries, poems, and different wordplay. It can also offer clues as to what the state of the spoken word was. In addition to that, I'm deeply indebted to the work of historical linguists who have dedicated their careers to studying the evolution of English. There are a lot of books and scholarly articles that have been published analyzing all these different areas, and I'm grateful to that because I'm not a linguist, I'm a dialect coach, though I am very passionate about this topic.
This podcast has grown out of our collaboration to develop a dialect for my portrayal of Abigail, and the desire to explore how the written word, language, and speech intersected in the 18th and early 19th centuries.
The letters between John and Abigail survive as one of the most comprehensive records of day-to-day life as well as political events throughout the colonies, the UK, and Europe during the Revolution and early federal period. But while there have been many different scholarly articles, books, miniseries, and musicals about the Adams' lives, the letters are for the most part passive, static documents to be studied in silence and isolation. At the time they were written, however, reading letters was a communal act. An entire household would gather around, listening eagerly as the recipient read aloud all the news and gossip from the friend or family member who wrote it.
Being well-spoken was an asset during this period, though not necessarily as a matter of class distinction. The American colonists proudly considered themselves more egalitarian than their fellow subjects of the king across the ocean, and the spoken word was a leveler at a time when not everyone was literate. Business transactions, politics, the dissemination of information, and the salvation of souls were all conducted verbally and very publicly. Everyone was surrounded by and contributing to a constant cacophony of voices. Young men graduating from college were expected to demonstrate their knowledge by sitting for exams and through recitation and rhetoric. Reading a letter, even to so small an audience as one's family, was as much a form of oration as a sermon or a debate. Weymouth, June 16, 1775. I sit down to write to you on Monday, but really could not compose myself sufficiently. The anxiety I suffered from not hearing one syllable from you for more than 5 weeks, and the new distress arising from the arrival of recruits agitated me more than I have been since the never-to-be-forgotten 14th of April. I have been much revived by receiving 2 letters from you last night, one by the servant of your friend and the other by the gentleman you mention, though they both went to Cambridge, and I have not seen them. I hope to send this as a return to you. I feared much for your health when you went away. I must entreat you to be as careful as you can, consistent with the duty you owe your country. That consideration alone prevailed with me to consent to your departure in a time so perilous and so hazardous to your family and with a body so infirm as to require the tenderest care and nursing. I wish you may be supported and divinely assisted in this most important crisis when the fate of empires depend upon your wisdom and conduct. I greatly rejoice to hear of your union and determination to stand by us. We cannot but consider the great distance you are from us as a very great misfortune, when our critical situation renders it necessary to hear from you every week, and will be more and more so as difficulties arise. We now expect our sea coasts ravaged. Perhaps the very next letter I write will inform you that I am driven away from our yet quiet cottage. Necessity will oblige Gage to take some desperate steps. We are told for truth that he is now 8,000 strong. We live in continual expectation of alarms. Courage I know we have in abundance, conduct I hope we shall not want, but powder, where shall we get a sufficient supply? I wish we may not fail there. Every town is filled with the distressed inhabitants of Boston. Our house, among others, is deserted, and by this time like enough made use of as a barrack. Mr. Borden with his lady are at present in the house of Mrs. Borland, and are going to Middleborough to the house of Judge Oliver. He, poor gentleman, is so low that I apprehend he is hastening to an house not made with hands. Looks like a mere skeleton, speaks faint and low, is racked with a violent cough, and I think far advanced in a consumption. I went to see him last Saturday. He is very inquisitive of every person with regard to the times, begged I would let him know of the first intelligence I had from you, is very unable to converse by reason of his cough. He rides every pleasant day, and has been kind enough to call at the door, though unable to go out, several times. Says the very name of Hutchinson distresses him. Speaking of him the other day, he broke out, "Religious rascal, how I abhor his name." We have had very dry weather, not a rainy day since you left us. The English grass will not yield half so great a crop as last year. Fruit promises well, but the caterpillars have been innumerable. I wrote you with regard to the money I had got from Providence. I have since that obtained the rest. I have done as you directed with regard to the payment of some you mentioned, but it encroached some upon your stock. You will write me with regard to what you have necessity for, and how I shall convey to you. Mr. Rice is disappointed of his place in the army, but has hopes of joining a company much talked of here under Mr. Hancock when he returns. I came here with some of my cousin Kints, who came to see me a day or two ago, and have left company to write you this afternoon, lest I should fail of conveyance. Pray be particular when you write as possible. Everybody wants to hear and to know what is doing and what may be communicated. Do not fail to inform me. All our friends desire to be kindly remembered to you. Gage's proclamation you will receive by this conveyance. All the records of time cannot produce a blacker page. Satan, when driven from the regions of bliss, exhibited not more malice. Surely the father of lies is superseded. Yet we think it the best proclamation he could have issued. I shall, whenever I can, receive and entertain in the best manner I am capable the gentlemen who have so generously proffered their service in our army. Government is wanted in the army and elsewhere. We see the want of it more from so large a body being together than when each individual was employed in his own domestic circle. My best regards attend every man you esteem. You will make my compliments to Mr. Mifflin and lady. I do not now wonder at the regard the ladies express for a soldier. Every man who wears a cockade appears of double the importance he used to, and I feel a respect for the lowest subaltern in the army. You tell me you know not when you shall see me. I never trust myself long with the terrors which sometimes intrude themselves upon me. I hope we shall see each other again and rejoice together in happier days. The little ones are well, and send duty to papa. Don't fail of letting me hear from you by every opportunity.
Every line is like a precious relic of the saints. Pray don't expose me by a communication of any of my letters. A very bad sore upon the middle finger of my right hand has prevented my writing for 3 weeks. This is the 5th letter I have wrote you. I hope they have all come to hand.
I have a request to make you. Something like the barrel of sand, suppose you will think it, but really of much more importance to me. It is that you would send out Mr. Bass and purchase me a bundle of pins and put in your trunk for me. The cry for pins is so great that what we used to buy it for 7 and 6 are now 20 shillings and not to be had for that. A bundle contains 6,000, for which I used to give $1. But if you can procure them for 50 or £3, pray let me have them. Mr. Welch, who carries this to headquarters, waits, which prevents my adding more than that I am with the tenderest regard, your Portia.
Thank you, Sarah. That was a great reading. Why don't you jump us off with just a little bit of the historical context of what's going on in the lives of the Adams at this time?
So this is from Abigail on June 16th, which is the day that we're launching this podcast. So it feels pretty amazing to be making this letter into a verbal record 250 years to the day after it was written. She's writing to John. He's in Philadelphia. He's trying and not really succeeding to convince the Continental Congress to declare war, essentially, and declare independence from the British Crown. She's referring back to the memorable events of, she actually put in the letter the 14th of April, but it was, of course, the 19th of April. It's been many months, and the fighting has continued, and Boston is under siege, and they're in Weymouth, kind of just waiting to find out whether it will come to their door or whether the army will continue further into New England. And she's sort of just in this holding pattern. And the specific reference in this letter to the request for pins is going to be familiar to anyone who has ever seen or listened to or acted in 1776, because it forms a very central part of the of the relationship between John and Abigail in that musical. And, you know, eventually he relents and sends her the pins, but only after she sends him the saltpeter. So, you know, of course, that letter, I think, is especially dear to people who are familiar with John and Abigail and their story. But it's part of that larger context of there's a war going on, and yet very little has actually been done to bring about any kind of pushback in the case of the Continental forces.
Definitely a scary time, full of a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, and she's actually closer to the action, really, than John at that point. He's in Philadelphia. He's 800 miles away. You know, he's counting on her, really, to tell him what's happening in the army's movements and in, you know, all of the sort of how the British Army and how the Navy and how all of these different moving parts are, where they're going and what they're planning to do. John really doesn't have as much, you know, information about it from where he is. So she's wondering, you know, are we going to be evacuated? Are we going to have to pick up and move? She doesn't really know. So the other thing about this letter that has been so interesting to me is that, and, you know, obviously this is all audio, so we're going to try to share, I think, the spellings and a visual of the letter. But there are so many words in this letter that really inform those pronunciation decisions. So Christopher, if you want to jump in on that.
Yeah. So this is a great letter to kind of start off with trying to interpret the speech of New England in the late 18th century. And let me kind of just walk a little bit through kind of what I do as I do that. Obviously, we don't have any audio recordings of Abigail Adams or anyone until over a century later. And so what I depend on a lot are the commentary of people who were alive at the time, who were writing about the state of the English language. Usually these were people who were writing spelling books, pronunciation guides, anything that might be a grammar, all these different kind of works. Especially these are fun ones to use, are guides for people who are learning English as a second language at the time. Can be a wealth of information. A lot of these writers are writing over in England, unfortunately. So there's specifics of what they're saying are more to what's taking place in London, mostly. And so it can be a little hard to get a sense of what might be going on in New England. We do have, fortunately, a very famous writer who writes in the next decade. Noah Webster starts to write his dissertations and writings about English in the 1780s. But he's very much alive and active and learning during the 1770s. And so I took what Noah Webster described as the state of English for him as sort of the foundation that we then built on. And he's very consistent in agreement with a lot of the other commentators over in England, and what they were saying was the status of the language. And so we get a really good sense of sort of the foundation of what English was like as far as pronunciation in the late 18th century. And some of the things that are going to stand out, hopefully, as you're listening to this, are a number of different sounds, in particular in words where you have that A sound. So, for example, in this one sentence, Gage's proclamation you will receive by this conveyance, that A. And also in, for example, the phrase, there'll be more and more so as difficulties arise, that O. So in a lot of English accents today, that A sound is kind of a diphthong. It's two vowel sounds, A. And similarly with O. Very consistently, the commentators in the 18th century make it clear that this was a monophthong for them, O, both of those sounds. And so that's something that we have throughout here. That might then, as you're listening to it, might make you think of languages that today do still have a monophthong in those types of sounds, perhaps an Irish, Scottish accent, other parts of England where that's still retained. That might kind of draw that to mind in your ear as you hear that. But that was very much a feature of 18th century English. Obviously, that's not something we're going to be able to glean from Abigail's letters. And there are some challenges with her letters because she and John are so well written. Their spelling is actually very good, which can sometimes make it difficult to find clues that we can use, but they're sometimes in there. One, for example, is her spelling of caterpillars. And I actually almost missed this one entirely because that's how I say it. I say caterpillars in my accent. Sarah had to point this one out to me because she says caterpillars. And I forget that there's supposed to be an R written there because I drop it myself. And here, Abigail has dropped that R in her pronunciation or her spelling of caterpillars, which suggests that maybe she was an R dropper. Now, we know that dropping of R's is a very prolific feature of a lot of New England accents today. Was it also historically? That's a great question to ask. If I ask Noah Webster, I look in his writings at the time period, he's very unequivocal, says that R must always be pronounced. Well, why is he saying that if some people aren't dropping it, maybe? He's not saying that M has to be pronounced all the time. You know, it's R that he calls out. And going through the secondary literature of a lot of linguists today, we get the sense that it was in the late 18th century that R was starting to drop in a lot of different accents over in England, as well as over in New England. And there's even evidence that suggests that R was starting to drop out earlier, maybe even during the 17th century in New England. And so going off of Abigail's spelling here and a number of other places, other letters and diaries from other people in New England at the time, particularly some that make it very clear that they were R droppers, we made the decision to soften and drop the R after a vowel in Abigail's accent here. And you'll hear that throughout as well, which could give it a New Englandy feel to you, might give it a kind of a Britishy feel to it, you know, whatever that feels to you as you hear that. But that was a choice we made to soften and drop the R after vowels. And I'll touch on one more point that kind of highlights the work that goes into it. It was and she's talking about the gentleman who has the violent cough. It's interesting that she spelled it VOI, and we have to be careful here. That could just be her accidentally switching the I and the O, violent. or it could be the way that she says it with an oi. And we chose to go with the kind of more oi, violent pronunciation of that. And there's justification for that, because during the 18th century, again, a lot of commentators make it clear that there were two choices, two variants for that I sound. Now, my I sound, and a lot of American speakers today, that I sound is, again, a diphthong. It glides from a vowel that's very forward. I. Noah Webster, however, and a number of other commentators describe it as starting in the back of the mouth, something closer to it. Oh, oi, oi, oi. And so, based off of her spelling here of violent and a number of other locations and other writings, I've chosen to give this New England accent that oi variant instead of the I variant that you might find in London developing around this time, or in use around this time as well. And so you'll hear that throughout as well, and that makes for some fun bits where the I sound and the oi sound might merge a little bit sometimes, or sound very similar at least. So that was another choice that we made that was informed by her spelling here.
And I remember you telling me that a lot of the commentators and people who were writing about speech, the way that you know what they were doing and how they were pronouncing things was that they would say, this is how you should be saying it. Mm-hmm. So the guide, the, insistence on a certain way of saying it wouldn't be necessary if people were not saying it this other, quote, wrong way in their daily speech. And I think that does sort of present an indication that there were sort of, it was important to be eloquent. It was important to speak correctly. You don't want to be like those country bumpkins who say it a certain way that makes them sound uneducated.
Exactly. Yeah. There's definitely, for many decades leading up to this, and will continue on up to our day, a very strong movement towards propriety and speech. It has been focused on grammar, proper grammar constructions in speech up to this point. In writing, there's been a lot of focus on proper spelling, but kind of towards the end of the 18th century, getting into the early 19th century, there's a lot of focus on proper pronunciation, which is where we then start to develop what's called the received pronunciation, or RP accent over in Britain. And that you might call it the BBC English, King's English, Queen's English, something like that. And we kind of all have an ear of what that sounds like. But very much the idea that being well spoken was a way of distinguishing your class, your education, sort of putting you above other people, was an idea that was definitely circulating around. And these commentators who would write these books tried to teach people who were eager to sound good how to sound good. And I say good in quotes, because that's just their perception of what was right and wrong. I'm very much of the opinion that there is no right and wrong in how people speak. As long as communication is taking place and people are understanding what they're saying, that's the key. And we don't need to go around policing each other's grammar and pronunciation.
Certainly, Abigail did not seem to care much about spelling and grammar. And it was really, paper was expensive. And if you're writing a letter, the main point is to get the information that you wanted to send to the other person to them without bothering too much about how it all was written down. It was, it was important for them to receive it, not for them to to see perfect penmanship and perfect spelling.
Right, exactly. And this isn't going to be published in a newspaper. This is just a private correspondence.
That's the thing too, is that, people think of Abigail Adams as this, proto-feminist. She was telling John, all these exhortations of how to make sure that women had representation and a voice, but it wasn't made public until the family decided that the letters should be made public. And she told him many, many times, don't share my letters. Don't let other people see them. Burn them. Because it wasn't intended to be a record. It was intended to convey information. It was intended for John and Abigail, send their affection to each other. It was private correspondence for each other, not the ages. Although John certainly had some foresight and saved all of those letters that she told him to burn.
Yes, thank goodness.
But it was not intended to be this, long-standing archive of either their relationship or political events. It was their private correspondence between husband and wife. And yeah, there was very little apparent concern about about the spelling, but the spellings really do help. As I'm reading it, I can see how it's intended to be pronounced in so many cases, and that's just fascinating to me. It's amazing to see that how Abigail wrote was really very similar, I imagine. It came straight out of how she would have spoken these things if she were saying them to someone.
Yeah, definitely. And being able to then give a voice to those words, take them off the page and get them back into our ears is such a fun and exciting project to explore.
Yes, and that's why we wanted to share it. We wanted to make this accessible and available for people who, if you've never even read one of the letters between John and Abigail, now you can have them read to you.
Yeah, we're excited to continue with this. And we hope that you've enjoyed this. Please feel free to leave some comments, follow us, share this with your friends and fellow history nerds, and let us know what you think. And we'll hopefully get some more of these out to you very soon.
Thanks so much.